Okay, I'm Bill Barry with the Maryland Labor History 250 Labor History Project. And it's exciting today to have a program about a wonderful project about the steelworkers at Sparrows Point. It's called Mill Stories. And the two people who put it together, Bill Shewbridge, who is retired now, but was a professor of practice audio and communication studies at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, for those of you who are local, and Michelle Stefano, who is now a folk life specialist at the Library of Congress, but was a folk life specialist for Maryland traditions and a visiting professor at UMBC when this project was created. So, Bill and Michelle, tell us how you came up with the idea of the Mill Story Project.
Michelle, I think you should go first because I
Okay.
think you brought it to us.
Well, actually, it really the origin story is thanks to you, Bill Barry,
Oh,
and also
your
Deborah
check is in
Rudis,
the mail.
and also Deborah Rudisil, who grew up in the shadows of the steel mill. Her mother worked there, but also a scholar and writer, and her excellent book, Roots of Steel, I always want to shout out. So the two of you, um, I forget exactly the details, but somehow made your way to Maryland Traditions at the Maryland State Arts Council, where I was a folklorist, to discuss how it's going to be shuttered and closed for good, right? Permanently. And this is in the fall of 2012. And so at the time, we were working on an annual awards program through the Maryland Traditions program for the state that honors traditions and people who keep cultural traditions alive across the state, and also places that are important in terms of living cultural heritage. And it worked out that we could honor the importance of the Sparrows Point Steel Mill uh, through this state honor as an important place for 125-year plus history and living heritage, right? The stories and memories of people still working there at the time, and then of course those who have worked there over a century altogether. So through that. Um, and by also working at UMBC, I guess it gets a little complicated. And I've, teamed up with Bill Shewbridge here. Um, Through that honor, that state honor, Bill and I realized that there is this important heritage that lives on in the hearts and minds of retired steelworkers and current at the time. And we, thought there's a project here in helping to safeguard that important living, the living memories, the stories that people have, the importance of the steel mill. So that's really the origin story. And so from fall 2012 through, what would you say, Bill, 2015, a little and
Yeah,
onward?
I think we picked up a few strays later in the project, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think around then.
yeah.
But one of the things I want to stress is what's great about this project, unlike many others, is that it keeps the memories of the workers and not just of the company,
Right.
and records it in oral histories as a vivid telling. And as I said, we will post the link to the Mill Stories web page, and people can go and look at the clips, the video interviews with dozens of steel workers, and they're just so great. Right. So you came up with the idea, and then what did you do?
Well, I think essentially what we do is we started interviewing down at the Union Hall. It was a great opportunity for me to get my students involved and bring them down to, actually, get some field experience. I think we wound up doing a total of 27 interviews and the students would cut those down in conjunction with Michelle's students as well, who actually transcribe the pieces. So if you go to the website, you can see the transcription. You can see a little bio of each of the 27. And yeah, so that was just a a great experience, for the students to hear that. And it's I think what surprised me about it was when we got involved in the project is that the story was changing so quickly. Like when the mill actually closed while we were in the midst of doing this work, and that added a whole other dimension to it. So.
It was really
Yeah.
catastrophic for thousands of people and for the Dundalk and associated communities.
Yes, absolutely. And first of all, the website is easy to remember, millstories.org.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, at the core of the project, from that state honor onward with Bill, are interviews. And so, our first times going to the Union Hall and in Dundalk, it was first to introduce who we are and get to know a lot of the steelworkers at their meetings, particularly the retirees in the beginning. Thanks to those meetings, and of course, thanks to you, Bill Barry, for introducing us. And then it grew from there, right? Informal conversations to set, more formal, recorded on video interviews. And that went for a number of years. And as Bill mentioned, we were able to integrate the courses we were teaching at UMBC into this project. I was in American Studies department. So many of the students were interviewing the workers about the importance of the mill to them, their stories when they first started, and over time. So we're talking over 2013 into 2014. Bill and I started realizing that well, first, Bill always says, very poetic, that you know after doing over a dozen interviews, interviewees, the steelworkers were finishing each other's sentences in terms of the stories and the themes that emerged from their interviews, such as fighting for protections and their health and safety, and also with respect to fighting against gender discrimination and racial discrimination on the mill. So many of the wonderful people we were able to learn from, were at the mill since the 60s and could talk about, what happened, with the Voting Rights Act passing in the mid 60s, and the effects and impacts of desegregation at the mill. So a lot of these themes and topics emerged from these interviews. And Bill and I realized that we have a longer film that we could piece together on our hands. Yeah, I don't know if Bill, you want to talk about how that film process went.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as Michelle said, we realized that, there was a story here, a collective story, and these folks in conversation with each other. And other things we were picking up. We had some community events that we shot. There was a wonderful thing at the Museum of Industry, I think, one of those years, and with Mark Steiner. And basically, we put together a half hour, video, which is available on the website, by the way. It's a little hidden still. I need to make a better link to it. But if you go to millstories.org/preview, you can actually view the whole film is there. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. I mean, at that point, there's like footage of the implosion of the L furnace, and there's a lot of, things that didn't make it into the short interview. So I would, recommend anybody to watch that if you're interested.
Yeah.
Is there material that's not on the website that you still have? Or did you put everything?
Well, I mean, all the interviews are edited.
Okay.
So I mean, they're cut down. We might have spent 20 minutes, 45 minutes with some of these folks, and what we came away with, for the website was maybe a 5-minute piece. Now, all those materials are in UMBC Special Collections in the Maryland Traditions Archives. So if a researcher, like Bill Barry or somebody was interested in, going over there, they could see the full, just about all the clips. I'm not sure if it's all available online. I think they're sort of working to get,
Yeah.
more of that archive online.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
And
it's
that's, oh, if I may, sorry.
sure, go ahead.
That's one of the things the students did, as Bill mentioned earlier. From these longer interviews, the actual full footage of an interview, which, yes, 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. Students were able to edit that down into short digital stories that are again on the website. Um, so yeah, but all of the documentation of events and what have you, are preserved in the archives at UMBC.
How did this affect your students? Have any response from them about hearing these stories?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of our students that were involved in this went on to uh, be, have careers in the fields, and so I think they were, impressed by that. But also, I think we had several students that were from that community.
Hmm.
And when you talk to anybody in Baltimore, they're like 2 degrees of separation away from, the mill or somebody that worked there, or they had a family member who worked there, or had a similar story, of deindustrialization affecting the lives of their families. So in that way, I think the students really, at least my students, got very involved in the story itself, and I think it for them it was like something that it was relevant. It just really, because of, it being of the moment at that time. I think they really responded well to that.
Yeah. And, also for the steelworkers whom we interviewed, there were students in the majority of interviews there, either asking the questions at the camera, filming the interview. And so that created a really interesting dynamic in that uh, those interviewed were speaking to this younger generation during their interviews, this
Yeah.
audience behind the camera, and talking about the importance of the labor movement, and organizing,
Hmm.
and the chipping away, or destruction of the middle class, and how job security now is so in such decline, and they were speaking to this younger generation. It really came out in a lot of interviews.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
it
would
really did. Yeah.
and I would also say for our people who are watching this, the importance of oral histories, of recording
Yes.
labor history, workers' history, because often workers don't leave written memoirs. They're not often literate. At one point, Sparrows Point, many years ago, preferred to hire people who were illiterate because
Hmm.
they felt that was easier to control. And so you'll see that it's very few of them are able to write stuff, but they have incredible stories. It's epic stories of their experiences down there and their relationships with each other.
Yeah.
So it's so
Yeah.
great that you were able to capture all this and in such detail and such volume. So
Absolutely. And a number of the workers were also writers
Yeah.
themselves, right? Writing
right,
poems,
a
and
couple,
pieces,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, but generally not.
to
But
reflect on the
yeah,
clothing.
no, I think it's a huge thing, and it shifts the focus as we're talking about in the 250th anniversary to what is history and what is important.
Yeah,
And officially, labor history is just ignored. And so, what we've done with this project is to try and make it the focus. And people like you with your project are certainly an enormous part of that.
absolutely. And it speaks to and connects to larger narratives
Yeah,
around industrial boom and bust,
yeah.
right?
And post-industrial
Deindustrialization.
America is really
That's right.
the affordability and the whole issues today. And
That's
I don't
right.
know if there are other projects like this at the Library of Congress doing anything. I know you're under restrictions, but
Yeah, no, of course. There are many projects that document the stories and memories and
okay,
experiences of people,
okay,
that stories that need to be told more, right? They need
right,
greater amplification.
okay,
And with Sparrow's Point, and the impacts of deindustrialization, those are processes that are often described in terms of statistics and numbers, right? And so this project was very much about humanizing,
yeah,
right,
that's great.
these impacts that are happening all over the world, and of course across the country and in Maryland. Yeah.
and they're so vivid and so powerful.
Yes.
All right, anything else? Bill, any last memories?
No, not really. I mean, we showed the film many times. We've all over the world.
Mhm.
We've taken it out. We've had several showings, I think, in Bethlehem itself, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and it was always affirming the audience's response to this, and that these I remember showing it in Europe, and people would say, yeah, the same thing is happening in Australia, or
Mhm.
something, and
Okay,
it was really I think it really resonates very broadly.
good.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's, may I
Yeah,
add?
sure.
um, one of the logistical challenges in this project, because Bill and I wanted to instill and foster a sense of ownership over it among the community, the Sparrows Point community. But that's logistically difficult in terms of we've been talking about editing their interviews down, right? So, in a perfect world, they would be doing that alongside of us, right? Deciding
Right.
what gets edited and what have you. But what we did do with this film is over 2, 3 years, we would screen within the Sparrows Point community here in Baltimore
Yeah.
at numerous venues, including Union Halls, the rough cuts of that longer film that came out of this project. And, during those screenings, what it did is spark more stories and memories and anger.
Yeah.
With from audience members afterwards, so these discussions continued, which was very much a part of the project. Yeah. So I
Good.
guess that, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much to both of you, and we'll see you soon. Bill Shewbridge, Michelle Stefano.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.